We're going to talk a little bit about Shoftim. And a Shofet, as we saw, is a little different than a Melech. As a Shofet is somebody who, during his lifetime, sees a problem in Am Yisrael and sort of steps up to the plate and provides a solution for the suffering of the Jewish people on some local thing. And then Am Yisrael sort of moves on. But that idea of some form of a collective responsibility for others is really embodied by Alav Shalom Morris Mizrahi. Tonight's discussion in the mood is sponsored by Joey Mizrahi in memory of his father, Moshe. And Morris Mizrahi was an individual who really represented a lot of that idea of collective responsibility for others. He's a person who lived literally taking care of others. He literally, part of his goals in life was to help others. The successes that he had was always shared with others. And I remember at one specific point when we had an intimate conversation, and it's something he would never tell people, but for certain reasons he had to divulge it to me. And the amount of families, relatives, not relatives, that he would personally support and help through difficult times was staggering, was shocking to me. And I don't know of many people who know that about Morris. And his memory really lingers through even the pages of Tanakh, as he emulated a lot of the important attributes of some of the most important people that we're going to talk about. Because we will see many different Shoftim, and you've read about many different Shoftim, some more successful than others. But one thing that united every single one of these Shoftim was a certain level of responsibility for Klal Yisrael on whatever scope that might mean. Every one of them felt, even within their own imperfect way, that they were responsible for the welfare of the Jewish nation. And I would say that feeling definitely is what permeated through Morris, is what actually made his life unique and special, and made him as a special individual. And I personally was fortunate to have a relationship with him, and was very often awed by his simple demeanor and his simple way that he secretly took care and helped many people, and that was almost just his second nature. So I think it's very fitting that we talk a little bit now about Sefer Shoftim in his memory. Amen. Sefer Shoftim, I would divide into three main parts, right? And this division is arbitrary. You can agree with it, you can disagree with it. It might, you can divide it any way you wish. But I would say it's broken down in a downward spiral. Perakim Aleph Teheh, which deal with the main Shoftim that we deal with, are Otniel, Ehud, Minor Shofet, Shamgar, and Devorah. There you're dealing with basically Shoftim that are not criticized on any level. We find at least no problem with any of these Shoftim. They are what we'll call painted by us as almost these picture-perfect leaders, right? You don't find anything wrong. Now, I think that's important because I think the shofet is not only indicative of the shofet as a person, but as we'll see, the shofet is somewhat representative of what's going on in the Klal Yisrael at that point. Right? The shoftim don't emerge, we don't see them emerge, as this leader that impacts the people and their nature and their development. We don't necessarily see that. We see that the shofet emerges from the people to be Moshiach at Yisrael. So the shofet is important. We have to look at the shofet as a representative of Am Yisrael at that point. So the shoftim emerge, the first shoftim emerge, and they're not criticized at all. Now, it's true, Am Yisrael in Perek Bet, as we saw, in Perek Bet, Psukim Aleph, Teheh, of course, we have that messenger who comes and he rebukes the people. And of course, we see that the people are not behaving correctly, so to speak. But nevertheless, in terms of the Shoftim, in terms of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's salvation, they're immediate, they're highly miraculous on some level, and we move on. The next group, which I term as the next piece, is the second group of Shoftim. Would you have Gideon, Yiftach, and Shimshon? And of course we have a whole host of minor Shoftim, Giladi, Ibtzan, all minor Shoftim scattered in between, right? In between these Shoftim. What happens here is we see a clear descent. All of these Shoftim are somewhat criticized. They do things right, but they do things wrong. And there is a descending level, and actually even internally, as we'll see, between Gideon, Yiftach, and Shimshon, their effectiveness is also questioned. Gideon is probably, of the three, the most effective. Yiftach, while he has personal flaws, is still effective in his military escapades. And Shimshon, well, we see also his own problems. His effect is probably the least felt. Right? In other words, his long-term effect, he does not subdue the Pilishtim as the other Shoftim. The other Shoftim subdue a nation, right? He just causes trouble, right? The Pilishtim are around before and after. He just kills a lot of them, right? So probably has the least effect. And then, of course, the third part of the book really represents no shofet whatsoever, and that is representing three major averot that Klal Yisrael do. And it's really the demise of Am Yisrael is absolute and total. And I would say you see Avodah Zarah in Pesel Micha, you see Shfichut Damim on the part of Shevet Dan, right? And of course you see Gilui, we end up with this massive question of Arayot. If it's not literally Arayot, but it's nevertheless the question of the Pilegish Begivah situation. So, and we end, and I want to make one point, which I don't think we should get caught up with, is whether the chronology of all this. I think sometimes, because I think it's immaterial, whether it's, I think the point is we have to look at the text, the Sefer of Shoftim, in the order that it put it. For whatever reason it put it that way, I think it's showing us a clear picture of descent, of Am Yisrael starting at one point and ending off somewhere else in a much worse shape than we began. And I don't know if it's material whether this happened in order or not in order, or I think we should take the book at its face value and hafuch, try and analyze why things are put in the order that they're put. Okay, I'm just going to ask someone if they can get me Shoftim Mikraot Gedolot, which has Radak and Ralbag in it. Okay? So, that's Sefer Shoftim. What I'd like to talk about tonight is certain aspects of Gideon. And Gideon is an interesting person. There are a few things that are unique about Gideon. Gideon has what we'll call the most amount, thank you, of what I'll call divine hand-holding. You know, Gideon, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, really treats with kid gloves. Every time he has a safek, God gives him a sign, another sign. In other words, within the chapters of Gideon, I think you would find the most miraculous events recorded in Sefer Shoftim is by Gideon, and certainly on a personal level, nobody merits this level of personal miracles being demonstrated. So, I want to talk a little bit about Gideon as a shofet. And Gideon and the story of Gideon has served much literature, or I would say served as the source of much literature of Hazal. Gideon begins his career as a malach comes to him, right? Messenger comes to him and says, okay, you know, you ever go to somebody and they said, and you ask them, how are you? And that's just a phrase saying hi. And they, what do they tell you? How are you? You know, they should be saying thank God, and that's what you'd expect. But it would be bizarre, but sometimes happens. How are you? You want to know how I am? I'll tell you how I am. And he gives you this whole litany, and you don't want to know that. You just it's just an expression. So you almost get that when the malach comes, and he speaks to him, and he says, Hashem imecha gibor ha'chayil. That's just a way we see this in Megillat Ruth. That's sort of a way of greeting. And what does Gideon say? Hashem imi? Yeah, Hashem's really here. Bi Adoni, v'yesh Hashem imanu, v'lama mitzatanu kol zot, v'ayeh kol niflotav, v'shesiplu lanu avotenu, le'emor halom mitzrayim he'elanu atah, neshtashanu Adonai, tenu b'kaf midyan. You get the sense that Gideon's really frustrated. But he says, oh, Hashem imecha. Yeah, he's really with me? Where is he? And what's going on? So there is this frustration, but this sense of that Gideon really cares. That Gideon wants to understand where HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in this. On a really... And God is not deterred, afuch, by Gideon's engagement. Maybe that encourages HaKadosh Baruch Hu more. So, Gideon is appointed as a shofet, as a leader, but Gideon needs to do certain things. In other words, and it very well could be a result of Gideon's lack of understanding of why things are happening. In other words, before we meet Gideon, there is a preamble, and that preamble tells us that there's a reason why things are happening so bad. And we almost get a repeat of what we had in Perek Bet, in the beginning of Perek Vav, right? That they're doing terrible things. They're worshiping Baal. And Hashem gives them over to Midian because of their own evil. That's what the Navi says. And even when they cry out, "Vayishla Hashem ish navi al bnei Yisrael, Ko amar Adonai Elohei Yisrael, Anochi yaletzi etchem b'Mitzrayim v'otzi etchem bet avadim," and you're still right. And I told you all this. "V'atzeh etchem yad samah hatzib v'geresh tav b'rechem v'tna lechem b'tarzam v'omra lachem ani Hashem etchem lo tir'u et Elohei Amori asher tem yoshvim b'tarzam v'lo shmatem b'koli." It seems. And this is an important theme to begin. So wait a second. Are they worshiping? Okay, are they worshiping the gods of the Amori? But they're calling out to Hashem. So why is God accusing them of worshiping gods of Amori? Okay, maybe they did, but not doing tshuva. So we will make as an assumption, which I think is a fair assumption, that even when they call out to Hashem, they are still not leaving the gods of the Kanaani and the Emori. They are what Eliyahu and Avi many years later were called Poseach al Shnei HaSeifim. Right? This is what something that, the Jewish people every now and then fall into. Well, look, of course I worship God, but it sort of can't hurt to do this Baal stuff also, just in case. And it could be a cultural influence, right? It could be this cultural influence that, okay, there's these gods around, as we spoke about 2 weeks ago, by leaving these people around, they're impacted. So Gideon doesn't seem to realize that. He questions Borei Olam. So Gideon, right, and we get a lot of information of how Gideon becomes a shofet. Gideon is told by God to do something, right? And and what is Gideon told to do? Gideon is told to destroy the mizbeach of the Baal, right? He's told to literally get up and destroy it, destroy the Asherah trees. Now, this takes a lot of guts, and he does it, right? He does it. He does it, however, at night, and he does it not alone. Okay, so there's a fear on his part, but he does it. And what happens? They were going to kill him, and we know who saves him. His father, through shrewd manipulations, let Baal fight for himself. This story, of course, sounds very familiar. It serves as the basis of what? Of the midrash of Abraham Avinu, where over there Terach is not the savior, but it's a similar answer. We see that Abraham destroys the idols. What happens? He's accosted for it, and what does he say? He says, well, they did it. The big guy did it, right? So in other words, the concept of letting the God fight his battles, clearly the source of this midrash is where seems to be settled in Gideon. There's this background. In addition, Sefer HaMaccabim, we're coming up to Hanukkah, has a very interesting play on this same theme. Matityahu is in Modi'in. And what happens? On the Mizbeach, what happens? There is what? There's people giving pagan worships on the Mizbeach. And what does he do? He sees somebody about to do that, and what does he do? He kills him. And then he destroys the Mizbeach. And that begins the thing, Mila Shem Elai, and he starts and he quotes, he goes back to the Pinchas. So the story of the shattering the idols, the shattering the Mizbeach, destroying that becomes a source in Gideon. We see that the Gideon literature is very much alive in Hazal, the story of Gideon, as well as in Sefer Hasmona'im. By the way, that's not the only similarity. Some of the similarities are within the Peshat. For example, how many people does Gideon wind up fighting with? 300, right? How many people does Abraham wind up fighting with? 318. Hasmona'im, Maccabim, Me'atim Keneged Rabbim, right? Within the Gideon story, who are the 300 people? They're the people that were perfectly pure quality. In other words, there's this, if you remember, there's this double, this double funneling out of the, probably we go from 32 to 10, to people who are afraid of their averot. At 10, we do the test of the bowing, and we wind up with 300, right? So it's the purified, perfect part of it. This purity. When we get to the Abraham story, right? What does the midrash do with it? Is it really 318 people according to the midrash? No, it's just him and Eliezer, who's a gematria 318, right? You have the perfectly pure. You have this sifting out of anything bad and a pure, miraculous victory, right? And of course, that's the Tehorim against the Timaim in Hanukkah. How many kings does Gideon do battle against? Right, eventually. Gideon, you guys know how many kings? Orev, Ze'ev, Zevach, Salmuna, right? So we have 4. That sounds similar to the Abraham story, right? 4 kings that he's fighting. Again, the fight of Gideon is unique. It's not just a fight against a nation. It's also a fight against the culture. It's a fight against Midian. It's a fight against Baal, which is clearly a influence of Midian. So we're fighting a nation, but we're fighting their religious influence on Am Yisrael. And of course, what does the midrash do with the Abraham Avinu story? Who was one of the 4 kings that we turned it in? One of the 4 kings is whom? In the midrash is Nimrod. Familiar guy. He's the guy with that ties the whole story back into the initial breaking of the idols, right? We go back to the arch Oved Avodah Zarah that Abraham Avinu is fighting. And again, of course, Sefer HaMakkabim talks about this fight against Avodah Zarah and against, Tum'ah and the Bet HaMikdash. One other point, and this again is a similarity, not necessarily only in Midrash, but even within the Peshat. Gideon, what incenses Gideon more than anything? In other words, Zeva and Salmunah would have stayed alive had they not done what? And this is for the sensitive reader, right? Had they not done what? Gideon was ready to let them live. They didn't kill whom? They didn't kill what? His family where? In Har Tavor, right? In other words, the message here that Gideon was worried about is to save whom? Is to save his family. In other words, what probably happened is like this. It's not so clear in the Peshat, but if I can reconstruct potentially based on some Mefarshim and also a little bit of poetic license, what probably happened was after the massive onslaught initially against Midian from Gideon's, or maybe even before that, they took some hostages, Jewish hostages in this area of Har Tavor, and what happened was, after the massive onslaught and the massive retreat of Midian and the Jewish people going after them, first thing they did was, the hostages are no longer of use, they probably either killed them, either that they can move fast, or just to kill them in act of retribution, or whatever it was, and that's probably what happened, and Gideon comes and he asks them, what happened to them? And they told him they looked like you, right? They looked like you. We killed them, right? And Gideon insists, and that causes the killing. So again, there's a similarity to Abraham, where the battle is set to save what? To save a relative. Abraham goes out to save Lot, and Gideon, on some level, is out to save his relative. So we see there's a lot of similarities, some within the Peshat, but more interesting to me now is the ones that are not in the Peshat, the ones that are in the midrash, that the midrash turns Abraham Avinu almost into Gideon. It almost literally siphons out from the Gideon story and actually tells us a lot and fills in a lot of gaps about Abraham Avinu from Gideon. Not to mention the Sefer HaMakkabim that is using the Gideon story, or makes clear comparisons to that in terms of what happens in Hanukkah. So we see that Gideon and the story of Gideon is a paradigm for how Hazal look, in many cases, as to the most important leaders and miracles of the time. And the question is, what about Gideon is creating that focus, right? What is unique about Gideon that actually literally enables us to take part of the Peshat of the Gideon story and fill in the gaps about the first Jew, the greatest Jew, Abraham Avinu even. But what is unique? So I think we need to understand a few things about Gideon. Gideon is the only shofet, right? The only shofet that actually, or that we know of, that actually creates a spiritual revolution. In other words, every single other shofet, and if we can go through them all, we have no point where that shofet fights a religious battle. We're not told of a shofet going out to obliterate Avodah Zarah or trying to make a spiritual campaign. Doesn't happen. And if you think about them, nobody does that, right? Certainly none of the main ones, right? You start from the beginning to Otniel, to Ehud, to Shamgad, even to Devorah, even though she's shofet the people, we don't see her battling Avodah Zarah on the level that Gideon does. And certainly later, Yiftach and Shimshon and any of the minors, we don't see that happening. Hafuch, Avodah Zarah becomes rampant, and towards the end of the book, it stays rampant. Right? And so therefore, from beginning to end, Avodah Zarah is a serious problem. It is only Gideon who takes upon this mantle of leadership, not just in a military way, but to create almost a spiritual revolution. And I think it's for that reason that we have those psukim before we see Gideon to tell us of the dire situation. And it is Gideon who questions God. And again, do we have anyone else who questions Borei Olam, any shofet? Really not. We have a few other people. Abraham questions Borei Olam. Right? Abraham questions Borei Olam at some point. Right? And so again, comes Gideon and he questions him, but he questions something else. You know, when we get to Moshe Rabbeinu will reject the job in all of humility, like Gideon. Gideon rejects the job in the beginning because of humility. Who am I? What am I? I'm the lowest person in Shevet Menashe. No, don't take me, right? But he's also questioning HaKadosh Baruch Hu if it's really Hashem here. And that is unique, I think, to Gideon. And so, while he questions, God empowers him to create the spiritual revolution. Almost he has to take that step to realize that there's a reason this is happening, and Dafka, you, who didn't see it, and who questioned me, and who blamed me, so to speak, you're going to fix this problem. And so it's Gideon Dafka who has the job to fix the spiritual situation of Am Yisrael. And it is through Gideon, at his own request. Now watch, we're going to see this ambivalence of the Mikra to Gideon, but at his Gideon's own request, if we take a look at each and every one of these miracles, we find that they mean something. So what are the first two miracles that he gets? Right? First two miracles, what are they? Huh? The wool with the threshing ground, right? One time the dew goes on what? On just the wool, and everything else is dry, and then the other time is in. And everyone likes to debate which is the greater miracle, right? So, but nevertheless, what's represented here? In other words, there were two parts of two different aspects. There is the threshing area representing the agriculture, and the wool representing the herding of the sheep, right? What? Textile. Right. So, in other words, let's say, Am Yisrael, and we'll see later in another sign, there's a separation of the two. One represents Am Yisrael, which we'll see seems to be represented here, Dafka not by the wool and so on, more by the agriculture. You know, because what is Gideon doing when he's met? He's threshing wheat, right? That's what his first thing. So, and we'll say that at some point, Midian is represented as herdsman, and the sign is you can't. There's a distinction, and if this is going to work, you have to differentiate yourself. Tal is here, it's not there. Tal is here, then it's not there. Meaning, the two God thing doesn't really work well. You gotta make your distinctions here. So right away from in the early signs, the message to Gideon and the message to the Jewish people is, we have to fix this spiritually. The battle here is not only going to be fought on the battleground, right? The battle of Gideon will happen, quote unquote, you'll excuse me for saying this, in the Bet Midrash. In other words, that's going to be a crucial element to Gideon's battle. At the same point, and the signs continue to indicate this, right? Right? We'll have other signs. What's the later sign that happens when he's still afraid to do battle? What happens? God says, go listen to whom? Go listen to what they're saying. And what are they saying? What comes into, there's a dream. The bread. And what is it new? Right. In other words, and they understood that Am Yisrael represented knocking down the tents of Midian. Right? So, it's that loaf of bread. We meet Gideon in the beginning doing what? Threshing, wheat. In other words, that seems to symbolize Am Yisrael. Again, the same message. The battle will be won if you, not because of how many people you are, if you spiritually will change. You need to rejuvenate yourself. Gideon is a challenge to Jewish people to separate, so to speak, themselves from the cultural influences that come around them, and then not be afraid to take a certain stance. That is Gideon's message. Now, Gideon himself, however, is imperfect, which is interesting. First imperfect shofet. Gideon himself is imperfect because by asking for all these signs, and his imperfection is through his what? Through his hesitation, right? He keeps hesitating by asking for the signs to begin with, by doing it, but being afraid to do it, bringing other people with him, doing it at night, right? Again, not ready to go to battle after the signs, needing God seeing him, says, if you want more, and God literally holds his hand and gives him as many signs as he needs to accomplish this. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu seems to treat Gideon with kid gloves because he understands the situation. And he understands the problems that need to happen. And he therefore shows a tremendous amount of tolerance towards what Am Yisrael is going through, and specifically Gideon as the paradigm of what they're going through. Because again, Gideon is a symbol of what is happening to Am Yisrael. So this development, so to speak, of Gideon, this spiritual rejuvenation on the one hand, but on the other hand, his own specific imperfections and hesitations that we see for the first time in his Shofet, and the message is given through the same thing. The signs are, in the same point, his message to Am Yisrael, but also a result of a certain imperfection in him. All the signs that he's given. And of course, his own attack on the Mizbeh HaBaal, the same point. It's spiritual rejuvenation, but we see also a hesitation and imperfection. So, Gideon as a spiritual revolutionary. That's very important, one piece of him, because that is, of course, the essence that Hazal captured in Abraham Avinu, right? And that is what Hazal wanted to accentuate. It was clear that it was Gideon that will be the paradigm for the beginning of Am Yisrael. Of course, in Abraham Avinu, the way Hazal see it, it'll be a perfect leader. There will be no hesitation. There will be no one except Abraham alone. All of the problems are removed, right? There will be no need for signs, although in the beginning we could talk about but there will be no serious lack of faith, right? And it will be Abraham Avinu who does emerge in all of his perfection. In other words, and of course, when it comes to the Hasmona'im as well, based on the Gideon in Sefer HaMakkabim, there is no hesitation, right? There is no, we're starting at 32,000, we're going to get down to 10,000, then we're going to get to 300. There is no such thing. As in Abraham 3:18, also, Me'atim, whatever we have, we fight the Rabbim, right? It's all quality. We're against Avodah Zarah, and we're going. So again, there's the hesitation in Gideon, but he becomes the paradigm for all of these stories. Gideon, of course, another key component of who Gideon was and his greatness, but again, his flaw. Gideon represents a peacemaker. Gideon, as we see the famous story with Ephraim, he avoids war. He avoids destruction, right? And he avoids civil war, potentially, with an entire shevet. You have seen the next Shofet who fares quite doesn't fare quite as well. Maybe not. Maybe we're a little too tough with this comparison. We'll see in a minute. But Gideon does Gideon come out perfectly with his own people? Not really. Because what happens? Right? No, before the ephod. Does he avoid civil war totally? Is there a group of people that he's not so generous and magnanimous with? Is there a group of people that he's angry with? Well, we know. The two cities of Sukkot and Penuel. Now, why? Because he asked them for help and they rejected him. So he, after his victory, takes retribution. Now, if we go to Yiftach, and just a side point, Yiftach's interlude with Ephraim is very different than Gideon's. Gideon, Ephraim's complaint to Gideon is, why didn't you call us? So it's true, he didn't call them, right? And he called them late. They did what they were supposed to do. So, okay, really, we can figure out that Ephraim and Gideon don't have much of a beef against each other. So, and he used highly diplomatic, to his credit, it's an area where Gideon shines. With Sukkot and Peniel, he asked for help. They refused the help, right? That's a problem. With Yiftach, at least according to his story, he asked Ephraim for help, and they refused the help. So Yiftach's interlude with Ephraim is different than Gideon's. And it might be closer to Sukkot, really. And so we're often harsh with Yiftach, and it's very clear that the Nevi is pairing Gideon's Yiftach, Gideon's Ephraim to Yiftach's Ephraim. I mean, there's no question. But at that same point, we shouldn't ignore the Sukkot issue. So again, we have peacemaker, but not perfect peacemaker. And the similar situation, of course, with our leaders, right? Of course, Abraham is the one who looks to all of humanity to take care of, right? Right? He fights for even his arch enemies, people who stand for everything that he disagrees with. We end the story of Gideon, and this is what you mentioned before. The spiritual revolutionary leaves us with a little avodah zarah. And the Nevi is very harsh, that this was a great error that Gideon did. And of course, what is that? He said, right. So that ephod, right, ends, we end with a little avodah zarah. And of course, Gideon leaves us with another problem. And that's a son of his, right? And of course, that Avimelech story shows us clearly, potentially, that we're not ready yet. In other words, Gideon, of course, probably has the most promise. He's a spiritual revolutionary. He destroys avodah zarah. He rises to the greatest heights on some level. But it doesn't fully work. It's not fully perfect, right? And so we are not ready to begin Sefer Melachim just yet. And if we're going to try with Gideon, right, we're going to see that it's not going to work, because who are we going to get? We're going to get Avimelech. Gideon doesn't want to be king. Maybe he knows this. In fact, a careful reading of the pasuk of Avimelech, I'm only saying this because I'm not sure that this was, I think if you read a careful reading, because in other words, Gideon doesn't want to be king. And I think that's very clear he doesn't want to be king. And I think we shouldn't, I don't think there's any place to read the psukim any other way. So now, what happens? Gideon has a son whose name is Avimelech, correct? So I want to read this pasuk. Upilaksho asher b'Shechem yalda gam hi ben. Vayasem et shemo Avimelech. Right? I want to. Gideon is not at all mentioned in the pasuk. He's only mentioned upilak sho, the pilegesh of Gideon asher b'Shechem yalda lo gam hi ben vayasem et shemo Avimelech. Who called him Avimelech? Not necessarily. It's very possible that Avimelech called himself Avimelech, right? He made his own name, Vayasem et Shemo Avimelech, meaning Avimelech himself is trying to be king, and of course, the way to make himself king is what? Make your father king, especially once he's dead, because once he's about to die. So that's the best way to turn yourself into a king, to turn yourself Avimelech. I don't think we should read that Gideon calls his son Avimelech and sort of wants to be king or doesn't want to be king, and reread dual motives up to Avimelech. Avimelech is very clear. I don't want to be king. God will be king. I think he realized it. He probably realized maybe in his own children that there was no one to step up to the plate. Whatever his motives were. It's very clear that Hashem is the king in Gideon's eyes. And I don't think we should read a pasuk to contradict that, so to speak, and say, oh, he really did, but he wanted some aspects of king, not other aspects of king. I think that's a misreading of the text. And I don't think there's any analysis. In other words, but it turns out that Avimelech comes, and Avimelech makes an alliance with the city of Shechem, probably not necessarily with Jewish inhabitants of the city of Shechem, and creates a massive revolution. Probably not just a military expedition and a military fight, because Avimelech turns to him and says, I'm the guy. You don't want any of the children of Gideon. It's me. We're going to kill them all. Probably also turns the clock back on that spiritual revolution. So there's a lot of hope, but we wind up at the end of Gideon's life almost back where we started a little bit. And that becomes part of the tragedy and the problem. That is a hope of great things to happen, but we are left again, for various reasons, with back in the same situation. So it was an attempt that doesn't work. It is therefore no question, so to speak, that why Hazal are looking at the story with so much promise. Now, I want to just close that. What's interesting, however, is any time Gideon is later mentioned in Tanakh, we go back to this, it's always in the final analysis, Gideon is a positive person. Gideon is mentioned in the text within the Peshat of the Psukim. His eskes are as something that we look fondly on. So if we go to Tehillim Pegima, right? We talk about, when we look back at the Shoftim, right? And we see that Aseh lahem kibidyan kisra kiyavim benachal kishon. We go back to the Deborah period. Nishbidu ma'ayu domen adama. And then Shitemo, Nidivemo, Keorev, Vechiz'ev, Uchzeva, Usalmuna, Kol Nesichemo. This is considered a success. We're looking back at it as a positive thing. Other references to Gideon, Yeshaya, here. Yeah, I think it's yeah. Yes, I'm sorry. Yeshaya Yod, Psukim Kafdal to Kavav. Lachen ko amar Adonai Elohim Sebaot al tira ami yoshev Sion me'Ashur. Don't fear Ashur. Of course, during the time of Yeshaya, Ashur was the many. But shevet yakechka. ומטהו יישא עליך בדרך מצרים, כי עוד מעט מזער וחלה זעם ואפי על תבליטיו, ועורר עליו אדוני צבאות שוט כמכת מדיין בסור עורב, ומטהו על הים ונשאו בדרך מצרים. Right? So, a clear reference back to Gideon. In other words, Gideon, we look back at as a glorious point in our history. That Gideon is in a sense a successful leader every time. And there are one or two others elsewhere in Yeshaya also, whereas Gideon is looked at as somebody who is, at the end of the day, a positive person. Even though it turned out, because of some flaws, we did turn out with some problems. The next Shoftim don't get nearly as a glowing report as Gideon gets. I mean, it's clearly when we're left with, of course, for example, Yiftach, the story of Ephraim is quite different. And of course, the famous vow of Yiftach, which I'll just talk about in a minute. We always wonder, is that fair? What is, the Gemara says, right? People ask, Shelo Kehogin, they were answered Kehogin. Who was it? Eliezer. Right? Eliezer Ebed Abraham asks Shelo Kehogin, but he gets Kehogin Rivka. Right? Shaul gets Shelo Kehogin, whoever, right, kills, but he gets, of course, he's answered Kehogin with David. Yiftach asks Shelo Kehogin inappropriately, and he's answered Shelo Kehogin. The question is why, right? Well, what's going on? And I think it's clear. Yiftach's answering Shelo Kehogin is different. It's not just a matter of hocus pocus. Yiftach misunderstood or misread something to the very core of what Am Yisrael was about. It seems to be that when Yiftach was saying whatever comes out of my house first, that could have very well been any person. He didn't think it would be his daughter. But what if it wasn't his daughter? What if it was a slave girl? Was he prepared then to do this? Was he only thinking about animals? Or maybe he was prepared. And in fact, we always take Yiftach's daughter as, and this is another discussion to talk about, we always take Yiftach's daughter as what? As the victim. Is she? Or is she a partner in crime? Because Yiftach wavers. And what happens? She says, no, fulfill your promise to Borei Olam. The essence, the core, the understanding is Canaanite at its very core. That Avodah Zarah mentality, that Molech mentality, it's all permeated. Yiftach's daughter to herself as well. Right? Let us remember later on, when Shaul makes a neder and Yonatan is going to be killed, and what happens? The people stand up, this is wrong, it can't be. Nobody stands up here. Why? Because pagan or Canaanite ritual has permeated the feeling. They see nothing wrong with what Yiftach is about to do. Yiftach is pained because he doesn't want to give up his daughter. His daughter's pained because she doesn't want to die. But there's no theological problem here. There's no ethical problem with what's happening. So that's just a side point that I wanted to make a side point that very often we think of Yiftach as, how did God allow this to happen to Yiftach? No, this is almost the midah keneged midah. You were willing to sacrifice a person, then okay, this is the person you'll sacrifice. And of course, we imagine Borei Olam waiting for this, and the midrash points this out. That Borei Olam is waiting for the neder to what? To make hafara, make the hatarat nedarim. But they don't matir the neder, right? And Hazal can't even stomach that it actually happened. So what do they say happened? No, she was put in isolation. Right? In other words, it can't accept it from a shofet. So the essence of Yiftach becomes, of course, the ultimate flawed leader at the end. And then, as I mentioned, the third in this trio is, of course, Shimshon, who leaves us with almost nothing. We don't get any successes at all out of Shimshon, and that's, just a pitiful excuse of the death. And we always think that the answer of that Shimshon killed more in his death than in his life, that's expression of gvura. But is it? or is it just an expression of almost we got nothing? We were left with nothing except a dead shofet and a lot of dead plishtim in the building. In other words, in a certain sense, that we keep going down. And again, that leads us, of course, to the next episode, which we'll leave for next week.